I first knew something was wrong when I saw the date on the project file. It was a Tuesday around 10 in the morning. The office was in that post-coffee, pre-lunch lull, the only sounds the hum of servers and the clicking of keyboards. I was finalizing the proposal for the Henderson account, a project I'd spent the last 3 months building from a sketch on a napkin to a fully costed, innovative logistics plan. It was my baby, my ticket to finally making senior partner. I needed to pull up the original client brief, so I navigated to the shared server drive. That's when I saw it. A folder named Henderson Final that I didn't create. Inside was a presentation deck. I opened it. My blood went cold. It was my work. My slides, my data models, my wording, but the title slide had a different name on it: Mark Rinaldi, Project Lead. I checked the properties. The file was created 2 weeks ago and modified several times since, always from Mark's terminal. My own files, the ones in my personal Jake Henderson folder, hadn't been touched in over a month. He hadn't even stolen the files. He'd created new ones and copied my work into them, cutting me out of the digital paper trail entirely. Mark's office was diagonal from mine. I stood up and saw him through the glass wall, leaning back in his chair, laughing on the phone. He was a handsome guy, mid-40s, with that confident, graying at the temples look that clients trusted instantly. He'd been my mentor when I started at the firm 6 years ago. Now he was my direct competitor for the one partnership spot opening up. I sat back down, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a mistake. I thought about the last few weeks. Mark had been unusually involved, asking helpful questions about my progress. "Jake, mind if I take a look at your projections? A fresh pair of eyes, you know." He'd even bought me lunch, telling me I was doing great work, that the partners were impressed. I'd felt grateful. Now I felt sick. I couldn't confront him, not yet. It would be my word against his, and Mark had 20 years of credibility stacked up. I was just the 32-year-old with potential. I needed proof. I spent the rest of the day acting normal. I went to meetings, I nodded, I even asked Mark a casual question about a different account. He smiled, clapped me on the shoulder, and gave me a breezy answer. His eyes didn't waver. He was a good liar. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, running through scenarios. The partnership review was in 4 weeks. The Henderson proposal was the centerpiece. Without it, my portfolio was just solid work. With it, I was a star. Mark knew that. The next morning, I went to our IT guy, Leo. He was a quiet man in his 50s who hated corporate politics almost as much as he loved classic muscle cars. We bonded over that. "Leo," I said, leaning against the doorframe of his cluttered office. "Weird question. Is there any way to see the version history on a file saved to the shared drive? I think I might have accidentally overwritten some important data." He looked up from a dismantled keyboard. "For your eyes only." "For my eyes only," I confirmed. He nodded, understanding. "The server keeps incremental backups. I can pull a log of every save event for a specific file, who, when, what was changed. It's a bit of a hassle, but it can be done." "The Henderson Final deck in Mark's folder," I said, my voice low. "Can you get that for me?" Leo didn't blink. He just gave a slow nod. "Give me a day." I spent that day in a fog of anxiety. Every time Mark walked by, my shoulders tightened. I watched him present in a team meeting, all smooth confidence, and I realized this was how he'd gotten ahead, not by being the smartest, but by being the most ruthless. The following afternoon, an encrypted file appeared in my private inbox. The log, it was all there in dry technical language. The file was created by Mark Rinaldi on September 12th. The first edits were minor. Then, a week later, a massive import of data from a file path that was clearly my personal drive on the local network. He'd accessed my computer directly. The final edits made just yesterday were to the title and authorship slides. It was a blueprint of the theft. Step by step, I had him. But as I stared at the screen, the initial surge of victory faded. Going to the partners with this would cause a firestorm. They might believe me, they might even reprimand Mark. But it would make me look problematic, a troublemaker. The Henderson account would be tainted by internal drama. They might pass us both over for partnership just to keep the peace. A simple accusation wasn't enough. I needed him to unravel on his own. I needed to turn his own weapon, his confidence, against him. I closed the file. I wasn't going to expose him. I was going to help him. I was going to help him hang himself with the very rope he'd stolen from me. The first step was to make sure he believed he'd gotten away with it, completely. I printed the server log, folded the paper, and slipped it into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. It felt like a weight against my chest, a constant reminder. Then I walked to Mark's office. His door was open. He was on the phone again, but he waved me in with a smile, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. I sat, my posture relaxed, and waited. I looked at the framed photos on his shelf, Mark with his wife and 2 kids at Disneyland, Mark holding a marlin on a deep-sea fishing trip. A perfect life built on a foundation of other people's work. He hung up. "Jake, what's up? You look like you've got something on your mind." "The Henderson proposal," I said, keeping my voice even. "I was looking through the shared drive for some old notes and saw your deck." A flicker of something, caution, crossed his face before the easy smile returned. "Oh yeah, just putting the final polish on it, nailing down the numbers." "It's brilliant, Mark." I leaned forward, injecting a note of admiration into my tone. "Seriously, the way you structured the phased rollout, I never would have thought of that. It's so much cleaner than my initial approach." He relaxed visibly, his shoulders dropping. "He bought it. Well, you know, years of experience, you get a feel for what the clients really want to see." "That's what I wanted to talk about," I said. "My original drafts had a vulnerability in the scalability analysis. I was running the numbers again last night and I found a flaw in the data set I was using. It would have caused a major problem in the second phase implementation." This was a lie. My data was solid, but it was a believable lie. Mark's smile tightened. "A flaw?" "Yeah, it's technical, but it's significant. I've already corrected it." I pulled a thumb drive from my pocket and placed it on his desk. "It's all on here, the cleaned up data, the new projections. I figured you'd want it, for the good of the firm." "Right." He looked at the drive, then at me. He was trying to read my angle. I kept my face open, helpful, the loyal junior partner supporting his mentor. "Jake, this is above and beyond." He picked up the drive, weighing it in his hand. "I appreciate this, really." "Of course," I said, standing up. "We're a team. I want this pitch to be perfect. It's a huge account for the firm." I turned to leave, then paused at the door as if a thought had just occurred to me. "Oh, and you might want to rerun the client presentation with the new numbers. The narrative flow changes a bit. It's stronger now, more compelling, but it's a different rhythm. You'll want to practice it." He nodded, already looking distracted, probably thinking about the work he now had to do. "Right, good point, thanks, Jake." I walked back to my office, my heart rate steady. The hook was set. I hadn't given him flawed data, I'd given him perfect data. But I had also given him a new, more complex narrative to learn, and I'd framed it as a rescue. He couldn't go to the partners and say, "Jake gave me bad data," because that would reveal he'd used my work in the first place. He was trapped in the lie I was helping him tell. For the next 2 weeks, I became Mark's most valuable asset. I offered insights on the client's corporate culture, things I'd learned from casual conversations with their mid-level managers that Mark in his seniority had never bothered with. I prepped him for questions the partners might ask. With every piece of help I offered, his dependence on me grew. His initial wariness evaporated, replaced by a grateful camaraderie. He started taking me to more lunches. "You're a lifesaver, Jake," he said one afternoon over steaks. "This thing is really coming together." "It's your vision," I said, raising my glass of water. "I'm just fine-tuning the engine." The day before the partner review, Mark called me into his office. He looked stressed. "The presentation," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You were right about the rhythm. It's not clicking for me. I'm tripping over the new sequence of slides." This was the moment. I had practiced this. "Do you want me to sit in on a run-through?" I asked, feigning casual concern. "I could give you feedback." Relief flooded his face. "Would you? That would be great." He stood up, closing his office door for privacy. He began his presentation, clicking through the slides I had created. He was clumsy. He kept reverting to his old, simpler talking points, getting tangled when the new data demanded a more nuanced explanation. After his third stumble, I held up a hand. "Mark, stop. Can I make a suggestion?" "Please." "The problem isn't the material, it's that you're trying to memorize it. Don't. You're Mark Rinaldi, you own the room. Use the slides as a guide, not a script. Talk to them like you talk to me at lunch. Just be confident. The numbers are right there to back you up." He looked at me and I saw it click. I wasn't criticizing him, I was empowering him. I was telling him to be himself, the confident, smooth talker, and that was exactly what I needed him to be. "You're right," he said, a familiar arrogance returning to his posture. "I'm overthinking it." He started again, and this time he was better. He faked his way through the parts he didn't fully understand with charm and bluffing. It was perfect. He was embedding his own incompetence into the fabric of the presentation. When he finished, I gave him a thumbs up. That's the one, they're going to love it. He grinned, clapping me on the back. Thanks, Jake, I owe you one. No, you don't, I said, smiling back. Just knock 'em dead tomorrow. I left his office, the echo of that friendly clap feeling like a brand on my shoulder. The presentation was now a weapon and he was holding it by the blade. I had handed it to him myself. All I had to do now was wait for him to swing. I walked back to my desk after leaving Mark's office, the faint pressure of his hand on my shoulder still lingering like a ghost. I spent the rest of the afternoon tying up loose ends on other projects, forcing myself to act normal. Every time I glanced toward Mark's office, I saw him focused on his screen, practicing the presentation. I left at 5:30 on the dot, something I rarely did, to avoid any more conversation. At home, I tried to distract myself with dinner and the news, but my mind kept circling back to the next day. I went to bed early but lay awake for hours, running through possible scenarios. What if Mark had sensed my trap? What if the partners saw through him anyway? I finally fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I arrived at the office by 7:30. The place was quiet, but Mark was already there, standing by the coffee machine. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but he greeted me with a confident smile. Big day, Jake, he said, pouring a cup. Ready to watch me knock it out of the park? The work is solid, I said, getting my own coffee. You'll be fine. Thanks to you, he said, clapping me on the arm. I mean it. This new data really tightened everything up. I just nodded and headed to my desk. The hours dragged until 10 o'clock. I gathered my notebook and pen and walked to the main conference room. The three senior partners, Ms. Chen, Mr. Wallace, and Mr. Davies, were already seated at the long table. Mark was setting up his laptop at the head of the room, looking calm. I took a seat along the side wall, away from the center of attention. Whenever you're ready, Mark, Mr. Davies said, leaning back in his chair. Mark began smoothly. He had always been a good speaker, and the first few slides, the overview and the client background flowed easily. He sounded authoritative, like he'd been living with this material for months. I watched the partners, they were nodding, engaged. Then he reached the core of the presentation, the scalability analysis and the phased rollout. This was where I had inserted the complexity. He started strong, but I noticed him glancing at his notes more frequently. When he described the data set, he used phrases like robust metrics and dynamic modeling without diving into specifics. Mr. Wallace, a man with a reputation for digging into details, interrupted. Mark, can you clarify the primary data source for these projections? The slide mentions a proprietary model, but I'd like to understand the baseline. Mark's smile didn't waver, but I saw a slight tightness around his eyes. Of course, Bill, it's a composite index we developed, pulling from industry benchmarks and our own historical data. It was a vague answer, the kind that usually worked when you sounded confident. But Mr. Wallace wasn't satisfied. Yes, but which historical data sets specifically? The Henderson account has unique parameters. I want to be sure we're not applying a one-size-fits-all approach. Mark paused for a beat too long. We used the data from the preliminary research phase, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the slide. It's been thoroughly vetted. I knew he was bluffing. The preliminary research was outdated. The new data I gave him was from a more recent, targeted analysis. He hadn't understood the difference. Ms. Chen spoke next. And the timeline for Phase 2 implementation, it seems aggressive given the new scalability figures. How did you adjust the schedule? Mark clicked to the next slide, which showed the timeline. It was the old one, barely changed. He launched into an explanation about efficient resource allocation, but he was circling the point, not addressing the discrepancy between the data and the timeline. The partners were silent. Mr. Davies scribbled something on a notepad. Mark finished his presentation with a forced smile. So that's the plan. I'm confident it delivers exactly what Henderson needs. There was a moment of quiet. Then Mr. Davies looked at me. Jake, you were involved in the early stages of this. What's your take on the timeline alignment? All eyes turned to me. I kept my expression neutral. Mark has done a great job integrating the new data, I said, my voice even. The scalability model is sound. I think the timeline just needs a slight adjustment to reflect the updated throughput numbers, maybe pushing Phase 2 back by 2 weeks to allow for the added complexity. I said it calmly, like a minor suggestion. Mr. Wallace nodded. That was my thought as well. The data supports a longer ramp-up. Mark's face was flushed. He tried to recover. Absolutely, we can fine-tune that. It's a flexible plan. But the damage was done. The partners had seen the crack in his armor. Mr. Davies stood up. "Thank you, Mark. Jake, we'll discuss this and let you know our thoughts later today." The meeting was over. Mark packed his laptop quickly, not making eye contact. I gathered my things slowly, giving him space to leave first. He strode out of the room without a word. I followed a minute later. When I stepped into the hallway, Mark was waiting for me, his back against the wall. His expression was no longer friendly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and sharp. "In my office now." I followed Mark down the hallway to his office. His shoulders were rigid and he didn't speak or look back. I kept my pace even, my hands loose at my sides. The office was quiet now, with most people still at lunch or in meetings. We reached his door and he held it open for me, his jaw tight. I stepped inside and he closed the door with a soft but definitive click. He didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he leaned against it, facing me, his arms crossed. The friendly mask was gone, his eyes were sharp and cold. "Start talking, Jake," he said, his voice low and controlled. "What was that performance in there?" I remained standing, mirroring his calm. "I'm not sure what you mean," I answered a question. "You know exactly what I mean." He uncrossed his arms and pointed a finger at me. "You fed me that data, you coached me on the presentation, and then you pointed out a flaw in front of the partners. You made me look incompetent." "The data was correct," I said. "The flaw was in the timeline and I assumed you catch it. When you didn't, I thought I was helping by clarifying. The partners respect attention to detail." "Helpful," he let out a short, bitter laugh. "You sabotaged me, you've been playing me for weeks." I shook my head slowly. "I've been assisting you, you asked for my help and I gave it. If you felt unprepared, that's on you, you're the project lead." His face flushed. "Don't hide behind semantics, this proposal was my responsibility." "Was it?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment. "Because I remember working on it for months. I remember you asking for my files, my notes, you presented my work as your own." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have no proof of that." "Don't I?" I reached into my inner suit pocket and pulled out the folded printout of the server log. I didn't hand it to him, I just held it up so he could see it. "Leo in IT pulled this for me. It shows every time you accessed my files and copied them into your own folder. It's all dated." Mark's eyes fixed on the paper. For a second he looked stunned, then his expression hardened into defiance. "So what, you think that matters? I'm a senior partner candidate, you're a junior, who do you think they'll believe?" "I think they'll believe the evidence," I said, tucking the paper back into my pocket. "But I'm not going to show them this, not yet." He stared at me confused. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand the position you're in," I said. "The partners already have doubts, they saw you stumble. If I give them this log, it's over for you, but I'm offering you a choice." "A choice," he repeated, skepticism dripping from his words. "Yes, you can go to the partners yourself. Tell them you made a mistake, that you relied too heavily on my work without proper attribution. Frame it as a leadership error, not theft. You might save face enough to keep your job, but you'll be out of the running for partner. Or you can wait for me to expose you and you'll be fired for cause." He was silent for a long moment, processing. I could see the calculations behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, his pride against his survival. "Why would you give me a way out?" he finally asked. "Because a public scandal hurts the firm and it hurts me by association," I said. "This way it's contained, you take the fall quietly." He turned away from me, looking out the glass wall of his office. I could see his reflection in the window. He looked tired, defeated. "I need to think about this." "You have until the end of the day," I said. "The partners are meeting at 4 to make their decision. If you haven't spoken to them by then, I will." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and left his office, closing the door softly behind me. As I walked back to my desk, I didn't look back. I knew he was watching me, but I kept my eyes forward. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I worked on other projects, but my attention was on the clock. At 3:30, I saw Mark leave his office and walk toward the partner's wing. His shoulders were slumped and he didn't make eye contact with anyone. I allowed myself a small, private smile. He had taken the bait. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the consequences to unfold. At 4:45, my desk phone buzzed. It was Ms. Chen's assistant. "Jake, Ms. Chen and Mr. Davies would like to see you in the conference room." On my way, I said. I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked the familiar path. The office felt different now, quieter. People were packing up for the day, but a few glanced at me as I passed. Word travels fast. I entered the conference room. Ms. Chen and Mr. Davies were seated at the table. Mark was not there. Ms. Chen gestured for me to sit. Jake, Mr. Davies began, his hands folded on the table. We've just had a very difficult conversation with Mark. I nodded, saying nothing. He confessed to taking inappropriate credit for your work on the Henderson proposal, Ms. Chen said. Her tone was neutral, professional. He characterized it as a significant error in judgment under pressure and has tendered his resignation, effective immediately. I let a moment of silence pass, then spoke quietly. I see, I'm sorry it came to that. We appreciate your discretion throughout this, Mr. Davies said. Mark indicated you were aware of the situation and encouraged him to come forward. That took integrity. I just nodded again. They didn't need to know the details of the pressure I'd applied. They only needed the narrative I'd constructed, the penitent thief and the gracious victim. The Henderson account is in a precarious position, Ms. Chen continued. The client is expecting a final presentation next week. You are the only one who truly understands the proposal. Can you salvage it? This was the question everything had been leading to. Yes, I said without hesitation. The work is sound, I can present it. Good, Mr. Davies said. The partners have discussed this. We need stability and competence. The senior partner position is yours, effective immediately, pending a successful close of the Henderson account. The formal announcement will be made Monday. Thank you, I said. I won't let you down. I left the conference room and walked back to my desk. The promotion felt less like a triumph and more like a transaction. I had what I wanted. An hour later, as I was gathering my things to leave, I saw Mark from across the floor. He was carrying a cardboard box, walking toward the elevators for the last time. He saw me and stopped. There was no anger left on his face, just a hollowed-out exhaustion. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, then turned and pressed the elevator button. I drove home. The sun was setting. My apartment was quiet. I poured a drink and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. I thought about Mark's family, the photos in his office. He would have to explain to his wife why he'd resigned. He'd have to find a new job with a reputation now permanently stained. His life was permanently altered. I had won, I had my revenge, and I had my promotion. It was clean, logical, and left no visible marks. But sitting there in the quiet, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I felt a cold, heavy clarity. I had proven I could be more ruthless than the ruthless. I had become what I despised in order to destroy it. The revenge was perfect. But as I finished my drink and placed the empty glass on the table, I understood the cost. The victory was mine, but the man who had started this journey was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly how to break a person without leaving a fingerprint. I had my future, but it felt built on something colder and harder than I had ever intended. It was simply the balance of things now. A fact. The story was over.